Welcome back to Beatrice's Quiet Tales, where the gift they call cheap is usually the only thing in the room money could never buy. I'm Beatrice. Tonight's story comes from a woman named Eleanor, who wrote to me about the day her whole family finally learned what worth really means. I'm going to tell it to you in her own words. Stay with me to the end. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. Here's how Eleanor's story begins. At the party they threw for her grandson getting into university, Eleanor's daughter-in-law lifted the hand-carved wooden box Eleanor had spent 3 months making, wrinkled her nose, and set it down in the corner next to the trash bags by the back door. "We keep everything modern here, nothing folksy," the young woman said, smiling straight into the phone her friend was holding up. The living room did that awful half-laugh. Eleanor didn't argue. She didn't cry. She walked over, lifted her box out of the corner, slid it into her bag, and drove home early without a single word. That night her son called her, and his voice was breaking. "Mom," he said, "please, what was inside that box?" And from here, I'll let Eleanor tell it the way she told me. My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm 69, and for 41 years my husband and I ran a little woodworking and furniture repair shop off Pelican Road, here on the Gulf side of Florida, where I refinished heirloom tables, rebuilt rocking chairs that had rocked 3 generations of babies, and taught half the town how to hold a chisel without taking off a thumb. I know wood the way some people know weather. I can run my hand along a joint and tell you whether the man who cut it was tired or proud. I can tell you what a piece costs by how it's finished, and I can tell you what it's worth by something else entirely, something that has nothing to do with the price tag. My hands aren't what they were. The arthritis came for them about 6 years ago, the way it does, slow, then all at once. There are mornings my fingers won't curl around a gouge until I've soaked them in warm water and coaxed them like stubborn children. I don't tell you that for pity. I tell you so you understand what 3 months of carving cost me and why I did it anyway. People look at a woman like me and they see a sweet old lady with a hobby. Harmless, a little behind the times. My daughter-in-law looked at me and saw exactly that, and I let her, because I learned a long time ago that being underestimated is its own kind of quiet. I spent 40 years watching people walk into our shop carrying $800 nightstands held together with staples and glue, and walk out happier with a battered old oak dresser we'd rebuilt by hand. I know what lasts. I know what doesn't. And I knew, the night my son called me with his voice in pieces, that my daughter-in-law had just learned the difference the hard way. Let me start where it really starts, with Walter. My husband Walter passed 9 months before that party. 44 years of marriage, and then a Tuesday morning in a hospital up in Sarasota, and then a house that was suddenly far too quiet. Walter was not a flashy man. He drove the same gray pickup for 21 years. He wore the same canvas work jacket until I finally retired it for him. He was the kind of man who'd notice the new boy at the marina, looked half-starved, and quietly leave a sandwich on the dock railing and never mention it again. But Walter was a saver, not a hoarder of money, a planter of it. He thought in decades. While other men down at the marina bought bigger boats, Walter bought small, boring, patient things and let time do the heavy lifting. "Time's the only thing that pays interest on patience, Elle," he used to say. What I didn't fully understand, until near the end, was how long he'd been planning for a person who didn't exist yet. Walter wanted to be a grandfather more than he'd ever wanted anything on this earth. We'd waited a long time for it. Daniel, our only child, married late to Brooke, and a baby took its time coming. Walter used to talk about it out on the screened porch in the evenings, slapping at mosquitoes. The fishing he'd teach, the terrible jokes he'd inflict, the trouble he'd be glad to cause. By the time our grandson Mason finally arrived, Walter was the happiest I'd seen him in years. And for 18 years, he was exactly the grandfather he'd promised to be. But here's the thing about a man who thinks in decades. He'd started getting ready to be a grandfather almost 30 years before there was a grandchild to be ready for. And he'd hidden the proof of it all that time, where I'd find it when it mattered. About a week before Walter died, when we both knew, he asked me to bring him the old tackle box from the top shelf of the garage. Not the one he fished with, an older, rustier one I'd seen for 30 years and never once opened. I assumed it held lures, or his father's pocket watch, or the kind of nothing a man keeps because throwing it out feels like a small death. It wasn't tackle, it was paper. Deeds, a land survey, a folded plat map gone soft at the creases, and a thick stack of property tax receipts rubber-banded by year, going back almost 3 decades. 5 acres of high, dry pine land up near a spring-fed creek in the next county over bought cheap, a sliver at a time, back when nobody wanted inland scrub. On the survey, in Walter's blocky pencil, it said, "For our first grandbaby." I started buying it the year Daniel turned 10, Walter told me, his voice thin but his eyes clear. Figured someday there'd be a little one, wanted to hand them a piece of ground nobody could ever take away. Land doesn't blow away in a hurricane, El. It just waits. He squeezed my hand. It's worth real money now. They put a highway interchange in 2 miles north. A developer's been sniffing at the whole stretch. I asked him how much. He told me. It made my breath catch. The parcel that he'd assembled out of grocery money scraps over 30 years was now worth, by the developer's own letter, just over $110,000 and climbing every season. Then Walter told me the part that mattered more than the money. The part I think about every single day. Don't just hand them a folder, he said. Paperwork, they'll glance at it and shove it in a drawer and forget where it came from. He smiled, the old Walter smile. Put it somewhere they'll keep. Hide it in something I built? No, something you build with your hands. Make them open it. Make them find it. Make it last. Make them open the box. It was nearly the last clear instruction my husband ever gave me, and I intended to honor it perfectly. So I built a box. I started the month after the funeral, partly for Mason, partly, I'll admit, to give my hands something to do besides shake. Florida black cherry, the prettiest board I had left in the shop, with a tight, honeyed grain. I cut the dovetails by hand. Along the lid, I carved a row of tiny pelicans in flight, because Walter loved the water, because he'd promised that boy 100 fishing mornings and only delivered 99. In one corner of the underside, small enough that you'd have to know to look, I carved his initials. WV, so a piece of him would be in the room for every birthday, every Christmas, every hard year, forever. It took 3 months. My hands made me pay for every cut. There were nights I cried over that box, not from the pain, from the missing. But I finished it, and it was, I'll say without false modesty, the most beautiful thing I have ever made. And then I did the real work. Inside the box, below the tray, I built a false bottom, the kind of hidden compartment I used to fit into old writing desks and sea chests for collectors who liked a secret. A panel of thin cedar, set on a lip, fitted so snug you'd never find the seam unless you knew it was there and pressed the right corner. Into that compartment I laid the deeds, the survey, the plat map, the whole 30 years of Walter's patience. And one more thing, a letter. Walter had dictated it to me in the hospital in his own halting words and made me write it down and read it back to him twice. A letter to the grandson he'd watched grow up, to be opened the day the boy turned 21 and was old enough to understand what land and patience and a quiet man's love actually weighed. Sealed in an envelope that said, in my best hand, to be opened when you're 21. Love, Grandpa Walter. I fitted the false bottom back over it, set the cedar tray on top, and you'd never have known. $110,000 and a dead man's last words, sealed with love inside something a young woman would call folksy. I wrapped it in plain brown paper, and I drove to my grandson's celebration. I should tell you about Brooke, because I don't want her to be a cartoon. She's more than that, and the more is the sad part. My daughter-in-law grew up the only child of a woman named Sylvia who measures the entire world in price tags. I met Sylvia exactly twice before the wedding, and both times she found a way to mention what her shoes cost. Brooke was raised to believe the worth of a thing, a kitchen, a car, a person, is printed on a little label, and that the worst fate that can befall a woman is to be seen as common. So Brooke curates everything. Their house out on the new canal development is a showroom. The cars are leased and replaced on a schedule, and somewhere along the way, every family occasion became content, a backdrop, a caption, a thing to be filmed and posted and admired. Mason getting into a good university wasn't only a joy to her, it was a brand moment. First in the family at a top 20 school, she'd written, over a filtered photo, weeks before the party. I tried to like her. I did. She wasn't cruel to me exactly in the early days. She just looked at me the way she looked at a yard sale, with a polite, faint distaste, like she might catch something off me. I think, underneath all the labels, Brooke is frightened. frightened the way her mother taught her to be, that if the wrong person looks too closely, they'll see something cheap. And the cruel joke of people like that is they can't recognize the genuinely precious when it's sitting right in front of them because it didn't come with a logo. She was about to prove that in front of 40 people with a camera running. She just had no idea what she was holding when she did it. And I should tell you about my son, Daniel, because the part of this story that still aches isn't Brooke. It's him. Daniel is a good man who has spent his whole life avoiding conflict the way some people avoid deep water. He's gentle, he's funny, he loved his father fiercely, and somewhere in his marriage he started going quiet, agreeing, smoothing, keeping the peace. When Sylvia redecorated their whole life in price tags, Daniel just went along. It was easier. Daniel has always chosen easier. After Walter died, Daniel came apart the way quiet men do, privately, where it wouldn't inconvenience anyone. He'd call me late some nights just to talk about his dad. He kept Walter's old fishing cap on a hook by his garage door. He, of all people, knew exactly who his father was, which is why, when the truth finally came out, it didn't break Brooke. Brooke deflected. It broke Daniel, because Daniel was standing right there at that party. He watched his wife set his dead father's gift out with the trash, and Daniel, keeping the peace, choosing easier, said nothing. Gave a small, nervous laugh even. He didn't know what was inside. I want to be fair to him about that. He didn't know. But he knew the box was from me. He knew his grieving mother had carved it with her ruined hands, and he let it go into that corner to avoid a scene. That's the thing he's going to carry, not Brooke's cruelty. His own silence. Remember that when we get to the phone call. Remember that the voice breaking on the line that night was a son who had just learned what his own quiet had cost. The invitation came on heavy cardstock with a gold foil border. Mason's achievement soiree, it said. There was a dress code for a graduation party. I didn't mind. I was, God help me, excited. I had the most important gift in the world sitting wrapped on my dresser, and I'd rehearsed in my head exactly how it would go. Mason would open it, find a beautiful cherry box, and then I'd say gently, "There's a secret in it, sweetheart. From Grandpa." Press the back left corner of the bottom. And he'd find the false panel, and the deeds, and the letter. And the whole room would understand that the quiet old man who couldn't be there had been planning for this boy for 30 years. Make them open the box, Walter had said. I was going to make sure he opened the box. I bought a new blouse for the occasion, soft blue, the color of the Gulf on a calm morning. I wrapped the gift in plain brown paper because the box didn't need gold foil to be precious, and I tied it with a bit of twine. I set it on the passenger seat of my car, where Walter used to ride, and I talked to him a little on the drive over, the way I do. Big day, Walter, I said. We're giving Mason your land. Can you believe it? Our grandbaby off to university. I had no idea I was about to watch a stranger set my husband down beside a row of garbage bags. Sylvia's house, they'd had the party at Sylvia's because it photographed better, was done up like a boutique resort. White orchids everywhere. A balloon arch in 3 shades of cream. A long table of tiny catered things that cost more than they fed. There was a step-and-repeat backdrop with Mason's name and the university crest in gold. I felt like a pelican that had wandered into a jewelry store. Everyone was younger, glossier, dressed in clothes that knew they were being photographed. I clutched my plain brown package, and I smiled, and I found a chair near the edge where the old aunt is meant to sit. But I wasn't unhappy. I had my secret, and secrets keep you warm. Every time a young woman in a dress that cost more than my car glanced at my package with a little flicker of pity, I just thought about the false bottom and the deeds folded inside it, and I smiled to myself. I want you to understand that, because of everything that happened, it's the part I grieve most. I walked in happy. I walked in carrying my dead husband's 30 years of love for a boy he'd helped raise, ready to give it away with both hands, glad to do it. I had no armor on. Why would I? You don't wear armor to your grandson's party. You bring a gift and a full heart, and you assume the people there will at least be kind. I was about to learn that some rooms will set your whole heart out with the garbage and call it a vibe. There was a woman by the gift table with her phone out, filming Brooke's friend Jenna, capturing content for Brooke's page. I didn't think anything of it. I'd think a great deal of it later. The whole event was built around the gift opening, which Brooke ran like a product launch. Mason sat in a tall white chair under the balloon arch, looking a little embarrassed by all of it, bless him. Jenna filmed. Sylvia narrated for the room. "Oh, that's the European brand, isn't it gorgeous?" And Brooke held each gift up to the camera, named the label, and thanked the giver as if the whole point of the present were the logo it announced. A designer watch, a leather weekend bag that cost what we used to clear in a month at the shop, a set of luggage with a name like a sports car, each one held up, admired, photographed, cooed over. The currency of that room was visible, and I didn't have any of it. I watched my son across the room. Daniel stood near the wall with a drink he wasn't drinking, wearing the smile of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He caught my eye once and gave me a small, helpless shrug, like a boy apologizing for the weather. I should have read that shrug better than I did. It was the shrug of a man who already sensed his wife was going to do something unkind and had already decided not to stop her. Aunt Marie was there, Walter's younger sister, 66, sharp and warm, the one other person in that room who'd truly loved Walter. She squeezed in beside me. "A leather bag for a teenager," she muttered. "In my day you got a duffel from the army surplus and you were grateful." I laughed. She patted my package. "Is that the famous box? Walter told me what you were tucking inside it, the old softie." She winked. "That boy is going to land on his feet." I had no idea that Marie's knowing, and her assuming everyone else knew too, would become the fuse on the whole thing. "You ought to tell her before he opens it," Marie whispered. "About the land, so they're careful with it." I shook my head, smiling. "Walter's orders, make them find it. I'll point Mason to the corner after." Marie chuckled. "He always did love a bit of theater, my brother." I think about that exchange a lot. If I'd listened to Marie, if I'd stood up and announced before anyone touched that box that there were deeds to a $110,000 parcel and Walter's last letter sealed inside, none of what followed would have happened. Brooke would have handled it like the crown jewels. There'd be no story. But I didn't, because I was honoring a dying man's wish. And because honestly it never once occurred to me in 1,000 years that anyone would set a handmade box out with the garbage. Set it aside politely, maybe. Re-gift it someday, even. But put it by the trash bags on camera in front of 40 people? That's a failure of imagination on my part. I'd lived 69 years and never met cruelty quite that casual. I didn't know to guard against it. The gifts dwindled. The designer pile grew into a little mountain beside Mason's chair. And then there were only 2 presents left on the table, a gift card in a crisp envelope and my plain brown package with its bit of twine. Sylvia picked up my package and read the little tag. "From Grandma Eleanor," she announced, with the gentle condescension you'd use for a child's macaroni art. A few people went, "Aw." A phone came up. Brooke took it, gave the brown paper a quick, assessing look, and the corner of her mouth did something I didn't like. "Let's see what Grandma made," she said, and she pulled off the paper. For a moment, one moment, I let myself hope. The paper fell away, and there it was. 3 months of my hands. Honey-grain cherry, glowing in the orchid light. The little row of pelicans carved along the lid. Walter's initials hidden in the corner like a held breath. In that bright, glossy room full of things stamped out in factories, my box looked, to my eyes, like the only real thing there. Brooke turned it over once, the way you'd check something for a price sticker. I watched her face. I watched her register that it was handmade. The faint unevenness that means a human did this, the very thing the magazines now say makes a thing precious. I watched her decide what that meant. Her nose wrinkled, just slightly. The micro-expression of a woman taught that handmade is a synonym for poor. "Oh," she said, "did you make this yourself?" "I did, sweetheart," I said, and my voice was warm, and I started to lean forward to tell her about the corner, about Walter, about pressing the bottom. "There's something special inside it if you..." But Brooke was already talking over me, to the room, to the camera. "That's so sweet," she said, in the voice you use to end a conversation. "Very rustic." And Sylvia laughed that little tinkling laugh and said, "Well, bless her heart." I felt the room tilt, just slightly. The old, familiar feeling of being made small, but I still didn't understand what was about to happen. I thought the worst of it was the word rustic and the bless her heart. I thought I'd smile through it, point Mason to the corner in private, and let the deeds redeem the whole afternoon. I was wrong about how far she'd take it. What happened next happened fast, and I've replayed it in slow motion 10,000 times since. Brooke held the box a moment longer, looking around at her perfect cream and gold party, her gift mountain, her watching friends, her filming Jenna. and I watched her do the social math of a woman who lives for an audience. A handmade wooden box didn't fit the picture. It clashed with the brand, and Brooke had a camera running and a room to perform for. Somewhere in her label-measured heart, she decided the funny, on-brand, content-worthy thing to do was to make a little joke of it. There was a row of catering trash bags lined up by the open patio door at the end of the gift table, black bags, neatly tied, waiting to be carried out. The kind of corner where things go to be hauled away. Brooke stood up, box in two hands, and crossed to it. "Okay, so," she said, laughing, playing to Jenna's phone. "I love Grandma, I do, but we have a whole modern thing going for the house, and..." She held the box out over the bags like a magician about to reveal an empty hat. "We don't really do folksy here." And she set it down, on top of the garbage. My box, Walter's Pelicans, Walter's initials, Walter's $110,000 of patient, dirt under the fingernails love. Walter's last letter to the grandson he'd never see grown, set down beside a row of trash bags, on camera. The room laughed, not everyone, but enough. The nervous, follow-the-leader laugh of people who have decided the powerful person in the room is the one being funny. Jenna's phone caught all of it. Sylvia clapped, delighted. And my son, my Daniel, stood against the wall, went pale, opened his mouth and closed it again. He said nothing. That was the worst second of the whole day, not the box by the garbage, my son's mouth closing. We don't really do folksy here. I've heard a lot of unkind things in 69 years. I've been called old-fashioned, behind the times, a sweet little nobody with her wood scraps. None of it ever landed like those words in that bright room, with my husband's heart sitting on top of a trash bag. Here is what I want you to understand about that moment, because it's the hinge of everything. I had a choice. I could have stood up and shouted. I could have said, "You foolish, shallow girl, do you have any idea what you just threw away? There are deeds to land worth more than your house sealed inside that box. There is the last letter your son's grandfather ever wrote." I could have made a scene that would have lived forever. And part of me, the mother bear, the widow, the woman whose ruined hands had bled into that cherry, part of me wanted to badly. But I didn't, because in that exact second, three things were true at once. 1, the deeds and the letter were safe, sealed behind the false bottom, and Brooke hadn't found them and wasn't going to. 2, a camera was running, and the cruelty was being recorded by the cruel woman's own friend, which meant the truth would keep without my help. And 3, this is the one that decided it. I looked at that smug, performing, frightened young woman, and I understood that the worst possible punishment I could give her was not a scene. It was the truth, delivered later, when she could no longer pretend she didn't know. So I did the only thing that had any dignity in it. I stood up quietly, walked to the row of trash bags, and reached down to take back what was mine. If you've ever stood in a room full of people and watched something you made with love treated like garbage, your time, your effort, your heart, tossed aside because it didn't come with the right label, then you know there's a particular silence that follows. The silence of deciding how much of yourself you're willing to defend in front of people who have already decided you're not worth much. If that silence is familiar to you, stay with me. This is where it turns. I lifted the box off the garbage. I brushed the lid with my sleeve, calmly, the way you'd brush crumbs from a child's shirt. I tucked it into my bag. The room had gone quiet now. The laugh had curdled. Even Brooke seemed to sense she'd misjudged the wind, though she covered it with a bright, "Oh, did you want it back? That's fine, take it. Sorry, I just..." "It's all right, dear," I said, and my voice was perfectly steady. "It's not really your kind of thing, I'll keep it." And that steadiness, I could see it land on her, bothered her more than anger would have. She'd braced for tears or a tantrum, the two reactions her world had prepared her for. A calm old woman tucking a wooden box into her bag and saying, "I'll keep it," did not compute. "I think I'll head out," I said to the room gently. "Thank you for having me. Congratulations, Mason, your grandpa would be so proud of you." I found Marie's eyes, gave her a small nod, and I picked up my bag with Walter inside it, and I walked out of Sylvia's resort of a house with my back straight. I didn't cry until I reached the car. In the car, with the door shut and the glossy house shrinking in my mirror, I let myself come apart for exactly as long as it took to feel it. I held the box against my chest. It still smelled faintly of the garbage bags, that sweetish, plasticky kitchen trash smell, And that, somehow, was the thing that undid me. That Walter's last gift, his 30 years of patient love, had spent 2 minutes smelling like a trash can because a young woman thought it would look good on her page. "I'm so sorry, Walter," I whispered. "I should have just told them. I should have protected it better." But here's the strange thing about grief and clarity. They can ride in the same car. By the time my tears stopped, something underneath them had gone very calm and very certain. The way the surface of the Gulf goes flat at dawn, and suddenly you can see all the way to the sand. I was not going to hand Brooke that land. Not like this. Not into a household that would call a 30-year inheritance folksy if it didn't photograph well. Walter's last wish had been, make them find it. Make it last. Make it mean something. You cannot hand a legacy to someone who sets legacies out with the trash for content. It would be like pouring spring water into a cracked cup. But the boy, Mason, who hadn't done anything, who was 18 and embarrassed and innocent of all of it, Mason still deserved his grandfather's gift. That was non-negotiable. Walter had saved that land for the child, not for the child's mother. So somewhere on the drive home, I started, very quietly, to think like a craftswoman again. Not about how to make a scene. About how to make this last, exactly the way Walter had asked, in a way no one could ever set out with the garbage. The phone was already ringing when I walked in. It wasn't Daniel, not yet, it was Marie. "Eleanor," her voice was tight. "I am so sorry. I am so ashamed of that hole. I should have said something. I should have stood up." "You and Daniel both," I said, not unkindly. "It's all right, Marie. I have it. It's safe. She never found the bottom." A pause. "She doesn't know about the deeds, the letter." "No, she just thinks she threw out a homemade box." Marie was quiet a moment, and then she said the thing that lit the fuse, though neither of us knew it yet. "Eleanor, I have to tell you, after you left, I was so rattled. I said something to Daniel. I didn't think. I told him his father would be heartbroken. All that land finally going to Mason, sealed up in that box just the way Walter wanted, and," her voice caught. "Eleanor," the look on his face, "I don't think he knew. I think I just told my nephew what was inside the thing he watched his wife set out with the trash." I closed my eyes. "It's all right, Marie," I said again, though my heart had started to ache in a new direction now, toward my son. "He went white as a sheet," Marie said. "He left right after, didn't say a word to Brooke, just walked out." I thanked her and I hung up. And I stood in my kitchen holding the box, and I understood that somewhere across town, my son was driving home with a piece of information detonating inside him. That he now knew the box by the trash bags had held his dead father's 30-year gift and his last letter. That he'd watched it happen and given his nervous little laugh and said nothing. I set the kettle on and I waited, because I knew, the way mothers know, that Daniel would call. 3 minutes later, he did. Before I tell you about the call, let me tell you what I'd done in those few minutes of waiting, because it matters. I'd carried the box to my kitchen table, and with the tip of a flat screwdriver, the same hands that had fitted that false bottom, I'd pressed the back left corner and lifted the cedar panel. Not to take anything out, just to be sure it was all still there, undamaged. To touch it. The deeds were exactly as I'd folded them. The survey, the soft old plat map, 30 years of tax receipts in their neat rubber band, and the letter in its sealed envelope, to be opened when you're 21. Love, Grandpa Walter. I held that envelope, and I thought about the hospital room where he dictated it, pausing for breath between sentences, making me read it back. He'd wanted that letter to outlive him by years. He'd wanted a young man someday, long after Walter was a photograph and a name on a stone, to sit down and meet his grandfather one more time. And a young woman in a designer dress had nearly set that meeting out with the catering trash, for a laugh. Make them open the box, Walter had said. Make them find it. She never opened it. That was the bitter joke at the center of everything. The one instruction Walter gave, and Brooke had skipped it, held the box, judged it, set it down, never once pressed a corner. Never knowing she was one curious touch away from $110,000 and her own son's future. I fitted the panel back into place, but I did not glue it shut again. I had a feeling I'd be opening it properly soon for the right people. Then the phone rang, and it was my son, and his voice was already broken before he said a single word. I learned later exactly what those minutes had been like for Daniel, and I'll tell it to you the way he told me, because you should see it from his side, too. He'd been standing by the wall, he said, in that awful second after she set the box down, fighting the urge to cross the room and snatch it back himself, and losing the fight because Brooke was laughing and Jenna was filming and making a scene would have ruined her day. So he'd swallowed it, told himself it was just a box, told himself he'd smooth it over with me later. The old reflex, choose easier. Then Marie had appeared at his elbow, shaken, and said the words, 110,000 in land. Your father's last letter, sealed inside that box, just like Walter wanted. Daniel said it was like the floor disappeared. He turned and looked at the row of trash bags, and of course the box was gone now because I'd taken it. And for one horrible minute, he thought it was gone for good. Genuinely gone. That his wife had set his father's final gift down with the garbage and that someone had already carried it to the curb. And that he had stood there and let it happen. And laughed. He didn't confront Brooke. He couldn't even look at her. He just walked out of the party, got in his car, and sat in the driveway with his hands shaking on the wheel, trying to do the math of what he'd allowed. Then he called the one person who'd know, the one person who'd made the box, his mother. He was praying I'd say I had it, and he was terrified I'd say I didn't. Mom, his voice cracked on the single syllable. Mom, please tell me you took the box home. Please tell me you have it. I have it, sweetheart, I said. It's right here on my kitchen table, it's safe. I heard him exhale like a man surfacing from deep water. A long, shaking breath that turned, halfway through, into something that wasn't quite a sob. Oh, thank God, he said. Oh, thank God, I thought, he stopped. Mom, what was inside it? Marie said what was inside. And there it was. The question the whole day had been driving toward. My son, in his car in a driveway, asking what his wife had set out with the trash. I could have softened it. I could have spared him. But Daniel was 40 years old and a father himself, and there are things a man needs to hear in full, because the weight of them is the whole point. Your father's land, Daniel, I said gently. The 5 acres up by the creek. The parcel he bought a sliver at a time, every good year, starting when you were 10 years old. The survey in his closet said for our first grandbaby. There's a developer offering just over $110,000 for it now. I let that sit. And his letter, the last one, the one he dictated to me in the hospital, for Mason to open at 21, so a boy who's about to leave home could meet his grandfather one more time. My voice stayed steady for his sake. That's what was sealed inside that box, sweetheart. That's what your father poured his whole heart into for 30 years. That's what you watched go down by the garbage. The line went very, very quiet. And then my son, my gentle, peacekeeping, conflict-avoiding son, made a sound I had not heard from him since he was a small boy. A raw, helpless, breaking sound. I didn't stop her, Mom, he said. I was right there, and I didn't stop her. I let him cry. Sometimes that's the whole job of being a mother. You let them cry, and you don't rush it, and you don't fix it too fast. I keep telling myself it's just a box, he said when he could talk again. That's what I told myself in the room. It's just a box. Don't make a thing of it. And it was Dad. It was Dad's hole. He gave that laugh, the broken one. I'm going to hear that laugh for the rest of my life. I know, I said. How are you so calm? He asked. How are you not, Mom? I'd understand if you never spoke to either of us again. Because I have it, Daniel, I said. Because your father's gift is safe on my table, and Mason is going to get every acre of it and every word of that letter. Nothing precious was actually lost today, except maybe some illusions, and those needed losing. I paused. And because being calm is the only weapon I've ever found that the people who threw it away can't argue with. He was quiet. Then, what do you want to do? Tell me what you want and I'll do it. For once in my marriage, I'll do the right thing instead of the easy one. And there it was, the first real spine I'd heard in my son's voice in years. It had cost him this much to find it. Maybe it always does. I want one thing, I told him. I want the whole family in one room, your Aunt Marie, Brooke, Sylvia if she'll come, and I want to give Mason his grandfather's gift properly, out loud, where everyone can see exactly what it is and exactly what almost happened to it. I let it land. Walter said make them open the box, so we're going to open the box together, just a little later than planned. Daniel told Brooke that night. He had to. He couldn't sit across a kitchen table from her holding something that size. I wasn't there. But I heard about it from both of them eventually, and the two versions tell you everything you need to know about the people who told them. Daniel's version: he sat her down, shaking, and told her there had been land worth $110,000 and his father's last letter sealed into the box she'd set out with the garbage on camera. And Brooke's first words, her very first words, were not "oh my God," or "is it gone," or "what have I done?" Her first words were, "Well, how was I supposed to know? Who hides a deed in a box and doesn't tell anyone? That's basically a trap. This is kind of on her, honestly. This is kind of on her, honestly." That sentence is the whole of Brooke, I'm afraid. Caught doing something unforgivable, her instinct wasn't remorse, it was defense. To find the angle where she was the wronged party. She'd set a dead man's legacy down with the garbage, and within 30 seconds, she'd built a version where the real villain was the grieving widow who hadn't labeled her gift properly. Brooke's own version, when I heard it later, was that she'd been blindsided and made to feel terrible over an honest mistake, and that nobody appreciates how stressful it is to host a party. Not once, in any telling, did Brooke say the words "I'm sorry" and mean them. I want you to hold on to that, because it matters for what I decided. I did not lock that land away to be cruel. I locked it away because a woman who responds to throwing out your husband's heart with "honestly, that's kind of on her," is not a woman you hand an unlocked inheritance to. So I made some calls of my own that week, with my reading glasses on and Walter's tackle box open on the table. I'd spent 40 years being good with my hands and quietly good with $1, and now I put both to work. I drove up to the county and sat down with the developer's agent, and I confirmed what Walter had told me: $112,000, firm, and a clause that the buyer covered closing. Every dollar of it earned by a man buying scrub land nobody wanted and waiting 30 years for a highway to find it. Then I went to see a woman named Patricia who handles these things, and instead of selling, I did something better. I put the land and the proceeds, if it ever sold, into a trust for Mason. A real one. Locked. Tied to his education and his start in life, released to him in measured pieces as he finishes school, administered independently, where it could not be sold out from under him, borrowed against, or spent by anyone but the trust on his behalf. Not by Brooke. Not by Daniel. Not by me. The boys, and only the boys, exactly the way Walter intended. It cost me a little to lock Daniel out, too. I won't pretend it didn't. But Walter's wish was for the grandchild, and the cleanest way to honor a wish is to make it impossible to bend. Then I did the more important thing. I planned a family dinner. A small one, at my house, where I have the home field advantage of a kitchen that smells like 40 years of good cooking. And I decided that at that dinner, in front of everyone, I was going to do exactly what Walter asked. I was going to make them open the box. This time, the right way. They came on a Sunday evening, into a house that smelled like the pot roast I'd made, because some weapons are kindness. Daniel, gray and quiet. Brooke, polished again, wary. Sylvia, who came because missing it would have looked worse than attending. Marie, who arrived early to help me and to stand at my shoulder like the sister Walter would have wanted there. And Mason, tall, awkward, 18, with his grandfather's exact way of jamming his hands in his pockets. I'd set the table nicely, and in the center, where a centerpiece would go, I'd set the box. The garbage smell gone now, the cherry oiled and glowing, the pelicans bright, Walter's initials in the corner. Brooke's eyes went to it the second she walked in, and her face did something complicated. She hadn't expected to see it again. I think she'd hoped it would quietly disappear, the way uncomfortable things do for people used to having discomfort handled for them. We ate first. I insisted. You don't do the hard thing on an empty stomach, and I wanted everyone settled, fed, and unable to claim they'd been ambushed. We talked about Mason's dorm, his roommate, his major. It was almost pleasant. Brooke even thanked me for the roast and seemed surprised to mean it. Then I cleared the plates, and I sat back down, and I put my hand flat on the lid of the box. I'd like to give Mason his gift from his grandfather now, I said. Properly, this time. The way Walter asked me to before he died. The table went still, Daniel's jaw tightened, Sylvia set down her wine, Brooke went carefully blank. Brooke, I said, and my voice was warm and steady and not unkind. You held this box a few weeks ago, and you decided what it was worth, and you set it down with the garbage. I'd like to show you and everyone here what you were actually holding. And I pressed the back left corner, and I lifted the false bottom in front of all of them. Slow and deliberate, the cedar panels sliding up out of the joinery I'd fitted with such care. And I drew out the contents and laid them on the clean table one at a time, like a banker counting out a fortune, which is exactly what I was doing. These, I said, unfolding the survey and the soft old plat map, are the deeds to 5 acres up by Spivey Creek. Your father bought that land, Daniel, a sliver at a time, every good year for 30 years, starting the year you turned 10. The note in his closet said for our first grandbaby. I smoothed the paper. A developer is offering $112,000 for it. They put a highway interchange 2 miles north. Your father knew it would come. He thought in decades. The number went around the table like a cold draft off the Gulf. Sylvia's mouth opened. Brooke had gone very pale. And this, I said, setting the envelope down gently, like setting down something asleep, is the last letter your husband ever wrote, Daniel. He dictated it to me in the hospital. It's for Mason to open on his 21st birthday, so a young man who's just left home can sit down someday and hear from his grandfather one more time. I looked up and I looked directly at Brooke, and I kept my voice as gentle as I have ever kept it, which somehow made it worse for her. This is what you held in your hands at the party, I said. $112,000 and the last words of a dying man. This is what you called folksy. This is what you set down on top of the trash bags, on camera, in front of 40 people, because it didn't match your house. Nobody breathed. Jenna's video, I knew, was still out there in the world, and everyone at that table knew it too. Brooke did what Brooke does. She reached immediately for the version where she was the victim. You can't put this on me, she said, her voice climbing. How was I supposed to know? Who hides a deed in a box and doesn't say anything? That's a trap. You let me. I didn't let you do anything, Brooke, I said, still calm. Your husband's father asked with his dying breath that the gift be hidden in something handmade, so it would be treasured instead of shoved in a drawer. I honored him. I assumed, foolishly, I'll grant you, that no one would set a handmade box out with the garbage. That assumption was my only mistake. The setting down was entirely yours. It was a joke, she said. It was for the camera, I finished gently. I know, that's rather the whole problem. I folded my hands on the table. You don't do folksy here, Brooke. You said it to the whole room. So you took the only priceless thing you were given that day, and you set it down with the trash because it didn't come with a logo, and because your friend was filming, and because you've been taught your whole life that worth is a thing printed on a tag. I let it land. There is no tag on love. There's no brand on 30 years of a man buying scrub land for a child he hoped he'd live to meet. You couldn't see it because no one ever taught you how to look, and it nearly cost your son his future and his grandfather's last words. Sylvia started to say something. Now, that's not fair, Brooke didn't, and I turned my eyes to her just once. Sylvia, I said, you taught her how to look. I'd sit this one out. Sylvia sat it out. Then I told them what I'd decided, because mercy and consequence can sit at the same table, and I'd raised Daniel to know the difference. Here is what happens now, I said. Mason gets every cent. Walter saved that land for him, and he'll have it. I laid my hand on the deeds, but not as an open inheritance handed to this household. It's going into a locked trust, administered independently, for Mason and Mason alone, his schooling, his start. It can't be sold, borrowed against, or touched by his parents. Not by Brooke, not by you, Daniel, not by me. Daniel nodded slowly. I saw, with a small ache, that he understood, and that the locking out included him, and that he didn't argue, because he knew he'd earned it by the wall that day. And the box, I said, comes home with me tonight. Mason can have it when I'm sure it'll be honored, and not before. A thing isn't safe in a house that didn't know it was precious. Brooke opened her mouth to protest about the box, I think, which tells you she still hadn't understood a word. And Daniel, my quiet son, finally spoke. Brooke, just her name, but in a voice I'd never heard him use with her. Don't, not one more word, not about the box, not about whose fault, not one more word. And Brooke, for the first time since I'd met her, closed her mouth and kept it closed. It had taken $112,000 and a dead man's letter to give my son a backbone. But there it was, better late. There was one thing left to do, the most important thing, the thing Walter actually wanted. His letter is for Mason at 21, I said, and it'll wait, sealed in the trust, until then. but Walter wrote a second part, for all of us, for the day the family first learned about the gift. He made me promise to read it out loud when that day came. I took a smaller envelope from my cardigan pocket. He didn't know it would be a day like this, but here we are. I opened it. My hands shook, not from the arthritis this time, and I read my husband's words to his family, in my kitchen, with his grandson sitting right there at the table. If you're hearing this, then our boy is grown enough to need a head start, and I'm sorry I'm not there to be a nuisance about it. I've been buying that land since Daniel was 10, because the best thing my own grandfather ever gave me wasn't money. It was the proof that somebody was thinking of me before I was even old enough to know it. That's what's buried in this box. Proof you were wanted, Mason, by an old man who'd have given anything for one more fishing morning. Build something on that ground that lasts. And whatever you do, my voice broke here, and I let it be the kind of family that knows the difference between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth. Your grandmother does. Learn it from her. All my love, Grandpa Walter. The room was silent. Marie was weeping openly. Daniel had his face in his hands. And Brooke was looking at the box on the table, the one she'd set down with the garbage, and for the first time, I think, actually seeing it. It was too late to be forgiveness, but it might, just might, have been the beginning of learning how to look. Here's how it shook out in the months after, because I know you want the ledger and not just the feeling. The trust is locked and growing. Mason starts university this fall with his tuition handled and his grandfather's land waiting under him like bedrock, sold or kept. That's his to decide at 21 and no one else's. Walter thought in decades, so now his grandson's future does too. Jenna's video, the one of Brooke setting the box down, saying, "We don't really do folksy here," turned out to have been seen by more of the family than Brooke realized. She'd posted it as a cute moment before any of us knew what was inside. She took it down the day Daniel told her the truth. But the internet keeps what it's given, and Brooke spent a long, quiet season being known in her own circle as the woman who nearly threw away her son's inheritance for a laugh. I didn't do that to her. She filmed it herself. There's a lesson in that, too, about living for a camera. Sylvia and I will never be close. But she stopped saying, "Bless her heart" to me, which I count as a diplomatic victory. Brooke and I are careful. She has never fully apologized, she's not built for it. But she asked me, a few weeks later in a small voice, if I'd teach her to work with her hands. We've sanded and oiled one wobbly, ugly, wonderful little shelf together. Her first handmade thing. She kept it. She didn't set it out with the trash. It's a start. Daniel is the one who changed most. Grief and shame did to him what 40 years of comfort never could. They grew him a spine. He speaks up now. He keeps Walter's fishing cap on the hook still, but now he's told Mason he'll teach him to fish himself, the way Grandpa would have. "I'm still learning how not to choose easier," he told me, "but I'm choosing it on purpose now." The box lives on Mason's dresser at school. When I finally let it go, I pressed his thumb to the corner so he'd know where the bottom opens. "WV," he said, finding the initials. "I never noticed that was there." "Most people don't," I told him. "You have to know to look." My hands are worse this winter. Some mornings the chisel wins and I can't carve at all. But I'm making Mason a small chest for his someday house, slowly, a few cuts on the good days, with his grandfather's initials hidden in a corner where he'll find them if he knows to look. Because that's what we do, the homemade grandmas. We carve ourselves into things quietly and we wait. Walter taught me that. Time pays interest on patience. If there's one thing I'd hand you from all of this, it's this. The world will tell you louder every year that worth is something you can read off a label, that the expensive gift is the real one and the handmade one is sweet but lesser. Don't you believe it? The most valuable thing in any room is almost always the quiet one, made by hand, given without a logo, easy to set out with the trash if you've never been taught how to look. Learn how to look. And whatever you love, build it into something that lasts, and never let anyone tell you it belongs with the garbage. That's my story. One handmade box, one row of trash bags, and a love worth more than the whole gold foil room. If it reminded you of a handmade gift you still treasure, tell them tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.